Hello everybody and welcome back to the second shelf and to another Tops and Flops video, this time for the month of October, the month that has just been gone, finished. If you're not familiar with my Tops and Flops, because I have a couple of new subscribers, thank you very much, and I didn't do one in September because I didn't read that much in September, but what I do is I look back at my reading of the previous month and then I pick a couple of books that were surprising to me or for some other reason that I would qualify as tops, and I also look at them and see which books disappointed me, and they are obviously the flops. And as always, we start with the tops category, and within the tops I'm most of the time start with a book that I've been thinking the most, and for the month of October that was without any doubt Louise Erdrich's novel The Painted Drum, first published in 2005. Now, Louise Erdrich doesn't need an introduction. She's a very well-known American writer, indigenous descent, and if you're following my channel, you know that in 2020 I have this project called Author Spotlight, and Louise Erdrich is in the author spotlight, which means that I'm reading all her novels in chronological order, publication date. And I'm doing that together with Terry from Miss Terry B, who occasionally makes YouTube videos. This is the last novel in the so-called Love Medicine series, which is set for a big part in the Ojibwe reservation, and we have recurring characters throughout, I think it's 8 novels in that series, but each novel is a standalone, so you don't have to read the whole series in order to read The Painted Drum. This one centers around Faye, a middle-aged 50-something woman who lives with her mother Elsie, and she is an estate appraiser and selling antiques, and she is asked to appraise an estate in New Hampshire, and she finds an old painted drum, an indigenous people's drum, and then we follow. She decides to give the drum back to the Ojibwe people. She travels there with her mother, and then the main portion of the book is actually the story of that drum, how has been made, why it has been made, its magical powers, so to speak. And then towards the end of the novel, the last portion, we go back to Faye, and then we see how the drum affected her life. Of course, I'm not within the belief system of the Ojibwe people. I don't believe in the fact that an object like a drum could have magical properties, but that really doesn't matter. The book is written so extremely beautifully, first of all, but also it made me think about the value we attribute to certain objects because they carry memories for us, and even in my belief system, they have almost magical quality and you don't want to lose them. You know, like this typical example, if there is a fire and you had to rescue one object, which object would it be? But also the idea that our actions have implications far beyond what we know. So the kind of the butterfly effect idea that made me think, or I thought about when reading the book. You don't need to read this book because of the stuff that I thought about, but it's just an incredibly beautiful, moving story about the making of the drum, about the indigenous people, about Faye and her mother and the sister, Faye's sister, that they lost. So it was just a wonderful read, and it definitely made me think. So the book I thought about the most. Next up in the tops is always the book that surprised me the most, and this time around it was a nonfiction book, which also might be due to the fact that I really read a lot of nonfiction in October, even though it was not yet Nonfiction November, but still. So the book that surprised me the most is The Genius of Birds by Jennifer Ackerman, first published in 2017, I believe, but I will leave the correct publication date in the show notes. This was a present for my birthday. It was given to me by Heidi from my reading life, one of her birthday presents, and it is about birds. And why did it surprise me? I'm not a bird person. I mean, I can hardly identify like maybe 5 or 6 types of birds. I'm not a bird watcher. I don't even contemplate bird watching. So I didn't, I probably wouldn't have picked up this book because I would have been thinking, yeah, birds. If it hadn't been given to me as a present, and I, of course, watched Heidi's review of this book because she had read it before she gave it to me as a present. And it's fantastic. It is about birds, about how we underestimate the brain power of birds. So Jennifer Ackerman, who, by the way, has been a science and nature writer for over 30 years. So it's about tool using, how birds use tools, make tools to use, about the language of birds, about making art, quote unquote, how they decorate their nest, for instance. And it covers a really wide range of different birds. So I learned something about, identifying birds, but the beauty of the book is that it really made me look at birds differently. Not all birds are equally intelligent. That's also something that is explored in the book. Like human beings, you have people like Stephen Hawking and you have people like me. So brain power is also something individual and something within a certain species of birds. But it was just so engagingly written and interesting that I can highly recommend this book, even for people like me who don't have anything normally with birds. So the book that surprised me the most was certainly The Genius of Birds. And then the last category is always the best nonfiction book that I read. And again, I already featured one nonfiction book, which could have easily be in the category, the best nonfiction book. But I picked a second nonfiction, just to show you a third book, and that is The Feminist Reader, The Essential Feminist Reader by Estelle B. Friedman. She's the editor, because this book is a collection of speeches, writings, essays by women and a couple of men who thought about women's rights and women's equality from the Middle Ages, the 1500s something, up to the present. And it covers essays from all over the world, which I really appreciated. So it's not, quote unquote, only Western writers, but from China and other Asian countries and South America, Africa. So it really gives a good overview over with regards to the development of feminist thought and thoughts about women's equality. And I was looking for a book about let's say, feminist history for quite a while. And if you are interested in that history, then I think this is a perfect book, because it's rather short essays, often excerpts. For instance, there's one chapter is Simone de Beauvoir, The Second Sex. And of course, it's not the whole book, because the whole book is like 800 pages. But there is one, 10 page excerpt of the book. So it gives you a really good overview about thinkers who had written and spoken about gender equality, about the right to vote, for instance, but also the right to work, to divorce. It's a real it's a real historical overview, and yeah. A little bit disheartening fact was that even after 500 years, we're still talking about the same thing. So we still haven't achieved what authors already in, the 1500s were talking about. I read this book, by the way, as a buddy read with Kathleen from Kathleen Ann, who also sometimes makes booktube videos, in our quest to educate ourselves more about feminist theory, feminist thinking, and the history of gender equality. And if you are at all interested in that subject, I can highly recommend this collection of speeches and essays and excerpts. So these were my 3 top picks for the month of October, and on to the flops. And I have to say, before I go into the 2 books that I picked for the flops, none of these books, it's only 2, so neither of the 2 books is a bad book. I didn't have any book in October that I thought was really bad that I wanted to feature, but still I had these 2 that I picked who were for me personally disappointing for various reasons, but again, not bad books. And certainly the first one, which is, I guess, a bit of a controversial pick for the flops category, because it won the Women's Prize for Fiction this year, and that is Maggie O'Farrell's Hamnet, which was published, I think, in the beginning of the year. Maggie O'Farrell is an Irish writer, and I have not read that much by her. I think I've read 1 novel and then her memoir, I Am, 17 Brushes with Death, which I quite liked but didn't love. And this book is historical fiction, you probably know, set in the 1580s, 1590s in Stratford. And it's about Agnes, Shakespeare's wife, and their 3 children, especially the boy Hamnet, who, and that is not a spoiler, dies in 1596 when he was 11 from, a disease. The book is in mostly focusing on the mother and the children, and Shakespeare plays, I would say, only a peripheral role in this. So if you're looking for a book about Shakespeare, this isn't it. It's about Shakespeare's wife and the children. What I really enjoyed about the book was the language and the research. It felt like Maggie O'Farrell was very confident showing us the life in the 1580s, 1590s in Stratford, the way people, dressed, the way people spoke, without having the quirky old English language in it. So that was certainly beautiful. My qualm with the book, why it was disappointing, was twofold. And one is more a marketing thing, because this book was marketed as a family grieving about the death of a child, and then of course Shakespeare, I think 2 or 3 years after his son's death, wrote his famous play Hamlet. And Hamnet and Hamlet are the same name back in the days in England, and it isn't, because Hamlet doesn't die until the last third of the book. So it's much more about the time before that, and we learn how Shakespeare and Agnes meet and things like that. So that was more a marketing thing that I thought I expected something different. But the main reason why it was disappointing to me is the person, the character of Agnes. We don't know much about Shakespeare's wife, how she lived, what she did, what kind of person she was. And so Maggie O'Farrell had to invent her, which is fine. But she invented her as the typical, if there is an extraordinary woman, it has to be a witch. So Agnes has these healing powers. She grows herbs, and she is this, and I don't like that. if you have to invent a person and make this woman extraordinary, she doesn't have to be, a witch. Please. That's just something that irks me personally. So if a lot of readers love this book, and I will leave a link to a very, very positive review that you should watch, and that's by Greg from Supposedly Fun. And I can certainly see that, but as you know, sometimes you just have a personal irk or a personal pet peeve that just makes the book not work for you, and that is what happened with me and Hamnet. And the second book in the flops category is, again, also not a bad book, but not what I expected, or it disappointed me, and that is Liz Moore's latest novel, Long Bright River, which was also published earlier this year. Now, Liz Moore is an US-American writer from Boston, and I read two of her previous books, Unseen and Heft, and I love them, especially Unseen. Unseen World. They were just really beautiful books with very unusual stories. And this was not it. It's actually quite a straightforward thriller. So we have Mickey, who works for the police. She has been a police officer for many years, as in the streets. So not a detective, but really a uniformed officer, patrolling the streets. And the other central character is Casey, Mickey's drug addicted sister. And then the premise of the book is that there are murdered women, most of them from the drug addiction scene, and then Casey is disappearing. Mickey can't get a hold of her, and she starts to investigate. And it's as thrillers go, it's okay. It's not. I mean, you have your usual red herrings, and the killer in the end is, the typical killer. I would say, I'm not gonna give any spoilers. So it was okay. It was rather fast paced, but from a writer like Liz Moore, I just, and that's my fault, not the book's fault, but I just expected something else, something different, something, special. And it just wasn't it. But if you are looking for, your typical entertaining, rather well-written, fast-paced thriller about a serial killer killing women, and you get also a little bit of politics about, the drug addiction problem, and the machinations of the police and the city, I can certainly recommend it, but for me, because I had absolute different expectations, it was a bit of a disappointment. Sorry, Liz Moore. Anyway, these were my tops and flops of the month of October. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you're all still safe and healthy. I'm looking forward, as always, to your comments, and I'll see you all soon in the next one.